Contributions is from Gillian Martin.
Officer, a fundamental responsibility of members of this Parliament is to ensure that its powers cannot be diminished without the consent of the people of Scotland. And the EU Withdrawal Bill, to which we're asked to give our consent, gives that power over to the UK Government and aims to press ahead, even if that consent is not given today. Now, the EU Withdrawal Bill, as amended, would grant UK ministers the ability to restrict the powers of Scottish ministers. It would, uniquely for the first time ever in devolution, give UK ministers the right to use secondary legislation to alter the devolved competencies of the Scottish Parliament, and that affects each and every single one of us. I'm deeply concerned about the lack of any statutory provision within the EU Withdrawal Bill for UK ministers to seek the consent of Scottish ministers or the Scottish Parliament to legislate in devolved areas, because this ultimately undermines the competence of our Parliament and it goes against the Constitution. Now, no one is arguing that there shouldn't be UK common frameworks, but their formation should be a joint negotiation between parliaments, not an imposition of one parliament's will over others, and we should have the right to vote on whether we accept them when and if they affect devolved areas, as we have done for 20 years. So take agriculture, and Richard Lochhead has made mention of this in his speech to the point where I should just say what he said. But in Scotland, 85% of Scottish agricultural land is classed as less favoured areas, which takes into account the challenging geographical conditions facing many of Scotland's farmers and crofters. Now, we know that the UK Government has confirmed that all UK farmers will continue to receive the current level of EU subsidies until 2024, but there's still so many questions to be answered on a replacement. So if an LFASS-type scheme is unable to continue, the impact... No, thank you, Mr Chapman. The impact on rural Scotland would be devastating. And a month ago, I asked whether the UK Government had carried out an impact assessment on LFASS withdrawal from the Scottish agricultural sector, and the answer was no. And the recent delay by the UK Government to the promised review into how EU convergence uplift payments are distributed also doesn't inspire confidence on common frameworks being entrusted solely to Whitehall. If this Parliament grants its consent to the EU Withdrawal Bill, we cede power over the formation of frameworks for agricultural support to a government who neither understands nor prioritises rural Scotland. And of course, fisheries are devolved, and decisions that affect the regulations of Scottish waters and vessels should be made in Scotland, for obvious reasons that have been outlined by so many of my colleagues. As Stuart Stevenson said earlier in his intervention to the Minister, a recently leaked Westminster fisheries paper showed that the UK Government intends to retain a veto over international negotiations. And this suggests that the UK Government is intent on imposing arrangements on Scotland. When it comes to a Brexit negotiating point, I just don't trust the UK Government to prioritise fishing over, say, the car industry. No, thank you. And the interests of Scottish fish industry would be, for that reason, best loan served with the Scottish Government being front and centre as those frameworks are negotiated, not waiting for a top-down edict which we can't vote on in this Parliament. And I'm also concerned that the Withdrawal Bill sets a precedent for other Brexit-related UK legislation, in particular the Trade Bill. Now, regardless of the precedent we consent today, we also cede power on procurement decisions. With EU procurement arrangements being out the window, what could that mean as Liam Fox ties himself in knots courting the favour of Donald Trump over trade? Now, a relaxation of procurement laws could well be tied up in a trade arrangement with the US that could see our public services adversely affected. I mean, could this impact on NHS Scotland? Well, I don't want us to be in a situation where we can't scrutinise those bills and vote on them. And the Conservatives should be standing alongside all of us in that. The UK Government has also refused to rule out the weakening of food and drink standards through trade deals. And the result of this may be the influx of low-grade products, as Emma Harper mentioned earlier in her speech. And Ross Finney of the Food Standards Scotland agency said, "It will be difficult for Scottish stakeholders' voices to be heard, or for the needs of businesses or consumers in Scotland to be given priority. The reservation of these powers to Westminster would prevent his organisation from operating effectively." And our government is trying to prioritise tackling obesity and alcoholism. Reservation of UK policy and legislative frameworks on food standards and labelling mean that Scotland would not have the competence to regulate in this area in order to improve public health. And we all know about the issue with Scotch whisky and the EU protected food name schemes that are in operation at the moment. There's still no answers on them either. So you see a direction of travel, which I don't think is particularly good for Scotland. So why would we want to relinquish any of our legal ability to legislate in devolved areas or accept new frameworks without the ability to actually vote on them? And Bruce Crawford is right. We've been asked to trust the UK government when they do not trust devolved governments. Take Clause 15, Section 3 of the Withdrawal Bill and respect the Constitution and the people of Scotland. And let's not forget that the people of Scotland did not vote for any of this, but who might feel a lot better about the situation if they know that their Parliament are representing them in a devolution settlement that they most definitely did vote for.